talking about the past and the future. I mean, 5 years ago, people who sold marijuana were criminals. Today, they're entrepreneurs. They were always entrepreneurs. They just now happen to be legal entrepreneurs. So this is an exploding business. Hey everybody, it's Tony Caldwell. Welcome back to another episode of Uncaptive Agent, the future of insurance. And today, my guest is Marc Still. Marc is a fascinating guy who's involved in a whole bunch of things related to the insurance business. First of all, he owns an insurance agency. And secondly, he is the CEO of a company called AVYST, which has a goal to disrupt the way insurance agents do business. Good news, he's not interested in disrupting insurance agencies or insurance agents. He's interested in really helping us be more effective, more efficient, save time, effort, and money, and do a better job for our clients. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Marc also has a software company that is tangentially involved in the marijuana business, which is exploding exponentially. In fact, Marc, as we're sitting here today, it's Thursday, the 5th of November, and I think another half a dozen states legalized marijuana on Tuesday during the national elections. So anyway, welcome.
Thank you. I might start off by saying 5 years ago, I was telling people that I wanted to be a disruptor. And then the more I got to know the business, the more I realized is that I just needed to be an enabler of really talented, wonderful folks in the independent sector that really are a huge benefit for their insured customer base.
Huh, that's interesting. So, you have an interesting background. So before you got into insurance, you were a risk arbitrager on Wall Street, or working for a Wall Street firm, and got into merchant banking. So you've got a lot of experience in doing deals. Is that how you got into the insurance agency business, or did you come in a different door?
Well, I kind of these days call myself a recovering investment banker. And about 9 years ago, my business partner of many years, a brilliant guy named Paul Voorhees, and we've been business partners for 25 years. I started at Bear Stearns and he started at Salomon Brothers, and we met in Dallas, and we met a young lady whose name is Gail Jordan, who we now co-own the agency with. And that's how we got into the business. We started an agency where we were essentially backing Gail, and now Gail is running our development team at AVYST, and is very, very specifically building what we internally call the AVYST interview, which the first specialty line that we're focused on is cannabis.
Okay, so anyway, in the insurance agency business, and out of that, you asked the question, there's got to be a better way, which really led to AVYST, which, our previous conversations about this, and what you just said is it's a way to interview clients or prospects, and much faster than typical, get them to the place where you can deliver quotes and proposals and things like that. So just, if you don't mind, just take a minute and talk to us about the AVYST process.
When we first started out in this business, we were like every other kind of small independent getting started. We created what we thought was a very different way to go to market to get prospects, and our strategy paid off. So we went from getting 4 referrals a day or 4 referrals a week to sometimes getting between 4 and 44 referrals a day. Wow. And what we found is that our CSRs and our producers were completely overwhelmed, and that the process that you go through in order to gather information at the point of sale was a horrible process. And as we looked around at who in the industry was able to solve the problem, we couldn't find anybody that could solve the problem. And that's where AVYST came into being almost 5 years ago.
Okay, so what AVYST does is automate that conversation that an insurance professional has with a prospect about their their insurance needs. Is that, and then is that what it does essentially?
Yes. And so it turns filling forms out into a rules-based conversation that's guided by our intellectual, well, it's really artificial intelligence that ultimately creates an interview where you will get 100% of the necessary data and hopefully no more than 2 or 3% of data that doesn't matter.
Okay. And you do that through just asking questions in real time. And as you get an answer, the system then prompts for additional questions based on the answers that the prospect or customer is giving at that moment. Is that how that kind of basically works?
You hit the nail right on the head.
Okay.
And so that not only makes a better customer experience and make the process more efficient, it also puts CSRs and producers in a place where they don't have to have 10 years in the business to know what to ask.
Okay, now I'm getting excited because when I started in the business a long time ago, I'd go out and see somebody and come back with about a third of the information that I needed. And then my CSR or my partner would go, well, you forgot to ask these 15 questions, go back and ask that. And then I'd come back. Now I had most of it, but I have to go sometimes back a third time. And, I'm not stupid, but I look that way to the prospect, right? What you're saying is someone starting off in the business could literally never make those kind of boneheaded mistakes again.
Well, it almost educates them on the fly. And what I found when I went to talk to kids coming out of college, so I actually went to the University of Colorado at Denver that had a specialty in risk management and insurance. It was a 4-year business degree. And when I talked to those kids about what they wanted to do, none of them wanted to work in an agency.
Okay.
Because they all thought that they were that they spent 4 years being trained for something better. And then they also didn't want to go anywhere where people still had fax machines. And so I think in this industry, up until this point, a brand new person coming into the industry as a CSR or a producer or anywhere real in the organization looks at it and says, I'm going to spend 5 to 9 years developing enough expertise where I really know what I'm doing every day.
Right.
And so what the AVYST interview has always sought to do is to give that brand new producer or CSR that capability in a matter of weeks or months instead of years.
Well, that's exciting. So we're talking about the future of insurance distribution, the future of the insurance agency. And one thing, there's a lot of disagreement about the future because obviously it's a crystal ball exercise and everybody has a different view. But one thing there's universal agreement about, and that is that the industry is facing a huge talent gap because so many people who look like you and me are likely to be exiting over the next 5 years. In fact, some people estimate that as much as 70% of the industry's people are going to be leaving in the next decade. That's an enormous challenge, not just for agencies that are starting in business, but agencies that want to stay in business and agencies that are getting acquired. All this is creating a huge talent problem. And again, to your point, 5 years at a minimum. That's what it. I always used to say, I felt like it took me 5 years before I became halfway competent as a commercial insurance producer. Right. And you think that this technology that you're developing can cut that down to what? 60 days, 90 days, a year?
I think within 60 to 90 days, you can have someone who, they obviously would have to have a license to get started. Right. But that gives them sort of the base level knowledge that they need to get started. And in an example, one of the CSRs in our agency who doesn't know very much about commercial and knows nothing about cannabis can actually use our tool with a live client to talk to a cannabis owner. And I did it as a pure experiment. And she was able to get all the way through the interview, and it's actually built so it's got cheat notes. I think, Tony, you and I would have called those cliff notes back when we were going to
Right.
school.
Right.
But on every question as they go through, if there's an insurance term that that may or may not understand, they just click on a box and it pulls up that definition in less than a second. And in the case of cannabis, if they're talking about cannabis and they don't understand something about some specific cannabis term, those definitions are also built in. So as they go through the system, they never have to stop and go and go ask the office manager, so what does this mean? What does that mean? And so what we do is we give them the confidence that they're going to look smart the very first time they talk to someone who's in a business they may or may not understand.
Okay. So tell me how this was working, let's say pre-COVID, when conversations with producers typically took place face to face. Is your technology mobile enabled? So do they work off an iPad, or how does it typically get done?
Well, so pre-COVID, we all know not most. There are a majority of the way things happen today is people would fill out those forms, and if they didn't know the answers to some things, or they had a CSR or some other admin person that would fill it out, they'd hand that person they would hand the piece of paper to the person next to them, and they'd fill it out, and then they'd have to go PDF it or do something else to share it. Well, now you can't hand it to anybody because they're not there. They're
Right.
home, and you're home. So what the eForms wizard, and we have users that said they would never use this because they like to do it the way they did it, where they pass the paper around the office. They can't do that now. But what they can do is they can fill out as much as they want to fill out. They can then share that with whoever they want to share within the office. They can all work on it, get all the forms filled out, and at the end of that, they can then digitally send that to 1 or 2 or 3 or however many carriers or MGAs or wholesalers, and they can do that all electronically.
So how does the information get into your product? Is it verbal, or does it get typed still?
It still gets typed in the eForms wizard, and it still gets typed into the interview. But in the interview, a lot of that information gets auto-populated. So for example, we have APIs with Google and other services that I can't name because of NDA, but we can gather a bunch of that information and never have to ask that question.
Okay, so you're actually getting information in the background, much as some carriers are doing as they're doing rating systems on their websites.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this is pretty interesting because a lot of people in our business, I think, are really frightened, whether they admit it or not, about technology. I mean, I think there's a feeling that technology is somehow going to disrupt the business. And by disruption, I mean something different than what you're talking about. In other words, it's going to put them out of business. That, that the people who are writing insurance on the internet are going to take their market share away, or that, some way technology is going to disrupt them. And what I hear you really describing is another tool where technology actually enables, to use your term, the agent, first of all, to be successful faster, but also to be successful much, much more efficiently. And so, one of the concerns that many agents have is, hey, commission cuts, have been taking place now for a long time, but they've actually accelerated over the last couple of years. And so there's obviously a pressure on agents to get more efficient, to save money in their costs, because their gross revenue is going to take a hit. So they either got to produce more business, or they got to do it cheaper. Have you done any cost studies to look at what the capability of something like your product gives the agent in terms of driving costs down?
It's a little all over the board, right?
Okay.
But our our first studies that we did, it was about a 75% savings in terms of time.
Okay.
And that, so then you can just, on an agency basis, you can look at that and say, I can either reduce overhead,
Right.
right? Because I don't need as many people because I'm getting more work done faster,
Right.
or I need to do more top line business using the same people, but I need to actually grow the business.
Okay. Well, 75% is huge. So, the typical insurance agency spends 50 to 60% of its revenue on people.
Right.
And, of those people, typically 25% of revenue represents the customer service function. And again, a lot of those people are doing things that apparently you can now do with your software. So does that mean that if I have customer service folks that are, say, doing cross marketing, account rounding activities, that kind of thing, that I could drive that part of the cost from 25 to 7 or 8?
No. So I should have been more specific. This is at the point of sale.
Okay.
Right. So this is, so if you
four,
think about.
So I get 4 producers for the cost of 1. Is that
correct? Because
okay?
They're going to be, well, so think about if you can ask 100% of the questions that need to be asked on the first phone call.
Right.
Because what we found in our agency is you're going to touch that client somewhere between 3 and 6 times.
Okay.
Just like you said earlier, oh, I didn't get all the information, I got to call them back.
Right.
Or I got all the information, but the quote that I thought that I was going to get came in 15% higher, and so I had to go back to another carrier.
Right.
So I had to go and they've got 7 other questions that carrier A didn't ask. So every time you touch that customer, it costs money. Every time you pick up the phone, every time you spend waiting on hold, and then you're going to have the same number of touches probably going back to an underwriter. So by the time you write that business, you've touched that piece of paper 10 times.
Yeah.
And so if you touch that piece of paper once, 2 things happen. One, I take that average touch from 4 to 1.2, and then the customer experience is better.
Yep.
I mean, way better, because especially if you look at kind of personal lines, you're going to compete against State Farm, right? They got 1 set of questions to ask you. And at the end, they don't say, let me get back to you in a day or 2 with some quotes. They say, so do you want the premium super package, or do you want to pay by the quarter? You want to pay by the year? And they can begin and end the conversation and actually sell insurance.
So just to clarify, I mean, your technology works both in personal and in commercial insurance, as well as standard
Correct.
and non-insurance. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah. So, let's use this experience that you have had over the last few years and the product that you've developed to kind of segue into a discussion about technology and its capabilities for insurance in general. So, again, a lot of agents out there looking at the next 3 to 5 years have seen that, okay, technology's coming, it's scary. And then COVID hit, and either they're adapting to it or it's accelerating their thinking about, I got to get the heck out of this business because I don't want to. But one of the things that technology is increasingly becoming is easy. So 15, 20 years ago, to add technology to your business meant you had to do a lot of work, a lot of learning, manuals. In fact, I remember, 15 years ago, getting a new agency management software program, spending 3 days in training just to fill out applications, and said, screw it. I told my partner, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to do paper and somebody else can. I mean, it was so confusing and hard, right?
Right.
But today, technology's easy, and how do you think that changes adoption rates? And do you think that agents are going to rapidly embrace tools like the one you've created? Or is it going to be a slog for another few years trying to get people to try things? How do you see the future of all of this?
Well, I think you make a really cogent point as it relates to the influence of COVID. I believe that COVID it was an enormous paradigm shift forced upon the independent agent industry. Because much to your point, lots of people in this industry have hair the color that you and I have, and they're leaving, and their willingness to try something new was an enormous push, and as a result, when there was better technology, they didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have to have it. So unless they brought all their people back into their offices, which, by the way, I don't see that trend changing.
Right.
And as I talk to people around the country, from big and small, people are downsizing their physical office footprint, period.
Right.
And it's even forced folks who are, you would have been very traditional, got to have a nice office, and now suddenly they're thinking, wait a minute, I've been paying $38 a foot for this office space, and I'm doing as much or more business with everybody working from home. And you think about the cost of that overhead. So I think that this business is going to become more and more technology driven, and that those who are adapting today are going to be really successful, and those who don't adapt will either fail or they'll be the agency that gets gobbled up by someone at low valuations. So obviously there's still a huge amount of private equity and private equity backed firms that are I mean, there's a deal every day or two, right?
Right.
And there's some of those big agencies are selling for multiples that are 10 to 13 times EBITDA, which is obviously a great price if you're a seller. If
Right.
you have a business with no technology and it's sort of falling off the wheels, you might get 3 times EBITDA. So if you want to make your business worth 400 times more, that means not 400 times, 400% more.
Right.
Sorry.
I was really looking for your answer for the 400 times. I got to tell you.
No, sorry.
I got my pen and paper out right here.
Yeah. So if you want to create value, and you want to monetize that value, whether it's in a year or 5 years, and you don't use technology,
right,
it is not going to happen for you.
Right. Well, how is that playing out? So, over the last, say, 6 months or so, as your sales teams, are talking to agents, what's happening to your pickup rate? Because that would be a good stand-in for how agents are thinking about what's happening right now because of COVID. Or is there more interest? Are you installing in more agencies? Is that accelerating, or is it staying about the way it was, say, 6 months ago?
It's accelerating a lot. In I'd say March, April, I think people were sort of just stunned. And by the time May rolled around, folks like Vertifor, who are great partners of ours, we've been in their Orange technology partnership since they started that, and I guess it's been almost 2 years now.
Uh-huh.
And Vertifor cares a lot about their customers. And so we got a call from them in early May as they were putting in programs to specifically help their customers during this COVID time. And as part of that, they asked us to, what we would offer to the Vertifor base. And so we gave them the eForms Wizard basically free of charge for 4 or 5 months, as just a way to try to help everyone as they were trying to seek whatever help we could all get when we were all sort of panicking, trying to figure out how to it's not revamping, but this forced everyone to reorganize. And so we were really pleased to be part of that. And we clearly picked up lots of eForms Wizard users, which we obviously think will turn into AVYST interview users down the road. So it's been really good for our business, to be candid. And I don't like to take advantage of things that take place that are bad for mankind. But this is clearly going to force people to use technology, because if you don't, you will not keep up.
Right. So, it's interesting. I was talking to Randy Schwantz just the other day. Randy is a longtime sales coach in the independent agency industry, written a number of books, probably the most famous of which is called The Wedge. And, his point was that, look, this business that has been around for 100 plus years is going to continue for another 100 years, because people need the experience and expertise of human beings, and they need to trust people. They want to feel like, hey, we don't want to do business with an algorithm. We don't want to do business with a faceless, thing. We want to do business with a person. In fact, I got a real insight a few years ago. A partner of mine in another business, they have a auto club, but it's for commercial truckers, and they have big groups of people in their client base that either speak Punjabi or Russian or some other language other than English. And so in their call centers, they've got lots of employees that speak those same languages. And they said that that we do that because when people are really talking about super important things to their business or their life, and things like contracts and stuff like that, they want to do it in their native tongue. And it just points out again that people are people, and we're always going to want to deal with, really important things with another person. So anyway, Randy's point is, producers aren't going anywhere. But what technology does, and he agrees with me, that technology just takes the drudgery away. And I really sense that what you're trying to do is take the drudgery away, so that producers, customer service people, or whatever, can focus 100% of their attention on the person they're talking to solve problems, dig deep for what keeps them up at night, and then use the technology to create lots and lots of options for solutions. So that's kind of how you see the future of the business too, I think.
Yes, I actually couldn't agree more. And then ultimately, it's look, if you've got a $300,000 home and a 2014 Honda, you can go to Geico and spend 15 minutes and probably save 15%. That's probably true. If your assets get any more complicated than that, like, yeah, I've got this house, but we have this rent house, and we've got Airbnb exposure. You can't go online and fill something out and really personally get your risk managed. And ultimately, you're going to need somebody to help you. And that's why I think that the independent agent, I see decades where people are going to need that expertise.
Well, they may be able to get some more complicated questions answered. I mean, you've talked about artificial intelligence, and certainly artificial intelligence is increasing in its ease of use and sophistication in terms of what it can deliver as an answer to people. But it also strikes me that artificial intelligence is going to increasingly give agents options to present to people that maybe they didn't have the time or the ability to create for themselves. I had an interesting experience about 5 years ago. So IBM created Watson. Watson's pretty famous, and you can maybe you use Watson in your product, but Watson's just an artificial intelligence engine that you can program, and it comes up with really interesting and creative solutions. So at this conference, they said, hey, we want you to take avocados and peanut butter and oil and a whole bunch of food ingredients and make cocktails out of them, and make them taste like martinis or whatever. And it was really bizarre, because you're drinking this stuff in a glass that doesn't look like anything you've ever seen before in your life, and it tastes just like something that you didn't expect. And the point is that Watson is able to take information and recombine it in ways that no one could have ever envisioned. And so I'm thinking, hey, I'm talking to you, you're my insurance client, I'm having an interview with you, I'm asking all these right questions, but in the background, artificial intelligence is slicing and dicing insurance policy forms in a way that is completely unique to your situation. And that's a wonderful thing for the consumer, but somebody they trust has to make sure it's still okay, and that's a human being.
Yeah. And look, there may be technology in the future where, in fact, one of the guys that's on our advisory board is a guy named Dave Anthony, and Dave created Call of Duty. So he's known as the trillionaire gamer, and so he thinks combining AI with augmented reality, that you can actually ultimately create characters that can speak to someone about whatever it is they're selling. He invested in AVYST because he thought that we were at a very unique place, and he wanted to be involved with us because he sees insurance as a place where augmented reality could ultimately be very impactful, which I believe it will be very impactful.
Mm-hmm.
But going back to your first point, ultimately you got to start in that first 3 feet where you're talking to someone to understand what it is that their needs are. And I can't get your social security number and figure out what you ought to buy for insurance. I've got to be able to talk to you about everything that's in your world.
Right. So, it's interesting that you bring up augmented reality. So I've done a lot of experimentation with augmented reality, and it's fascinating to sit across a virtual desk from another human being who's just an avatar and after, a minute or two, you forget that this is all electrons. And you're really having a conversation with somebody. It's face to face. What that means is not that an avatar replaces a person, like in the case of Soul Machines. I don't know if you're familiar with that company, but they have amazingly lifelike computer generated avatars. But it's still a little bit of Stepford Wives ish, if you will. But what to me augmented reality means is that I can sit across the desk or the table from somebody anywhere in the world just as easily as I can here in Oklahoma City. And if I have a fabulous interviewing system that asks all the questions that ever need to be asked and is using AI to prompt, as you give me an answer, well, here's another question that you really ought to ask as a consequence of that as an insurance agent or an insurance agency owner, now my marketplace is the entire United States, for example, not just my home state. And every industry is equally, I have capabilities to write business in that industry, even though I've never done it before.
Right.
And I can do it seamlessly and easily and in a way that the prospect, really has confidence that the product I ultimately deliver to them is real. And so what does that reduce me to? And what I think it reduces me to is the capability of establishing the relationship in the first place. That unique chemical thing that happens between two human beings where we like each other and we create a bond of trust, which is just reinforced by the transaction and the questions and all those things. So it's interesting. I mean, I think technology is going to be fabulous personally, but I think what it really does is it shines a light on these intrinsic human skills that the talented agent both comes with naturally, but also gets trained to improve.
Yeah, I think you make really, really great points. I do believe that this paradigm shift that's taken place, I don't see a threat to the independent agent in the next decade. Because when I first started looking at this business 10 years ago, there were folks out there saying, within a decade, all of the independent agents are going to be gone because of all the things you just talked about. But ultimately, I think when somebody's insuring their business or if they've got lots of assets, they want to have a relationship with who's ever helping them protect that. And I think that personal interaction has been key to that. It'll be really interesting to see how different life gets when, you know, you're not meeting your agent for gin and tonic to talk about your insurance needs. You're going to Zoom meeting with him or some other such thing. And does that change the way that relationship is?
Nope.
It probably does for guys like you and me, right? Because my friends are my friends, and you know, I'm basically, I mean, sort of a joke that I'm the CEO of a technology company. I'm a salesman. That's what I am, and I do that because I've built great relationships
Right.
and with really great people. I don't know if I could meet somebody brand new over the phone and have that same kind of interaction and that same kind of relationship. But I think the generation after us, Tony, is going to be used to doing that, and they still might want to be able to look somebody in the eye, even if it's across the Zoom, to
Right.
say, is this guy really looking out after my best interest? And do I really trust this guy with my home and my cars and my boats and my wife's wedding ring? And do I really trust this? Am I really getting good advice here? And can I really look him at, you know, look him in the eye like I've done all my life?
Yeah, and I think that's already happening. I mean, I know my own personal experiences. I have friends all over the world that I've met online, and Zoom or its equivalent technology is just making those things better. And so when you see people in the face to face after a decade of talking to them, you know, online, it's just like it didn't change anything. So, and it's a little bit like virtual reality. Once you enter a virtual reality world, your brain within about 60 seconds to 120 seconds, it's real. And so this is happening, and it's going to happen, and the adoption of it's going to be interesting to see what it does to business models. But you know, one last thing I wanted to touch on with you, which is marijuana. So, you know, again, talking about the past and the future. I mean, 5 years ago, people who sold marijuana were criminals. Today, they're entrepreneurs. They were always entrepreneurs. They just now happen to be legal entrepreneurs. So this is an exploding business. And you know, you and I both have some exposure to it. So I'm chairman of a bank, and we have a burgeoning banking business for marijuana. And obviously, you know, you're helping insurance agents that are trying to insure marijuana related businesses, you know, grow. And I think that's interesting because it's exploding. So just touch for a second on some of the capabilities that you've developed with your technology to help agents help people who come to them with what is still a difficult to insure risk.
Well, one, I think you're right in terms of the growth, and I wish I could tell you that I was smart enough to see all this coming. But about this, actually in September of 2019, we started looking at specialty lines for the interview product. So we had looked at personal lines. Obviously, and we built an enormous database to start to manage that data. So as we looked at the commercial side, at specialty lines, I picked cannabis and hemp because it was not that big of an industry. I could get my arms around having all of the necessary data. I hired subject matter experts in September that were programs experts, and then we hired some cannabis experts, and then, you know, but we're also building technology, and so it didn't just really rise to the top automatically.
Right.
And by the way, the AVYST interview is written in codeless technology, which is the new hot thing.
Right.
I'm glad it's a new hot thing because that's how we started this process two and a half years ago. But
Yep.
it basically puts us into a position where our technology doesn't know if it's a marijuana flower or a hamburger or a chair. It
Right.
just it is just rules based that says if it's this, then it's that, and to guide you through. So everything we do from a industry perspective can be done by analysts, right? So
Right.
The other thing that I felt very strong about cannabis, it was going to change dramatically. And so you got to be able to shift. And if shift means I got to go rewrite the code, that's not a solution. That's why our industry today is essentially stuck in legacy, because all the big players have to go rewrite the code. We'll never rewrite the code. We'll just change the business rules. So in March, when the world was coming apart, I kind of looked in the mirror one day and said, it was like day 4 of quarantine, and said, you know, I'm going to take charge of my own destiny here. I'm going to really go develop this digital marketplace so that the marijuana and hemp industry has one place to go where, if I can force all the players to be digital, we can have the most efficient commercial lines market for this one industry. And I can look at that, I can get my arms around it, and I can control it. And so that's how we started. And then I started putting more resources into it when COVID started getting worse, because my belief and Tuesday I got proven at least a little bit right, is I think the whole moral judgment and question is giving way to tax revenue for states and cities. And ultimately, I think that's why the federal government rolls over, is because we all need the revenue. We're all using it anyway. So why don't we make this a product that, I mean, it can't be any worse than buying lottery tickets, right? It's, you know, people are going to make bets. You might as well get, you might as well get revenue out of the betting system. That's what the lottery system is all about. So I don't see that the cannabis market's any different. And I think it's going to grow like a weed, all pun intended.
Yeah, and obviously your software, you've already set this up, because we've had conversations offline about this in the past, so that agents can be immediately successful as experts in insuring cannabis-related businesses. So just to throw that out there, that over the last 3 to 5 years, I think this has been a big head scratcher for agents. You know, how do I've got this opportunity, what do I do with it? And that's really a solved issue today. So anyway, if somebody's interested in becoming a green agent, and I'm not talking about utilities here, in their local area, they should get a hold of you. So
we've been working on this for over a year, talking about and actually it'll be marketed in the marketplace as In the Weeds.
Okay.
So we are really going to get in the weeds to make sure we understand your risk.
Right.
And we think we'll launch this in more of a commercialized effort, in early 2021.
Okay, good. All right. Well, I'll be looking forward to seeing how.
So anyone that's interested in the sector, I'd love to talk to anybody, because I think we all have a lot to learn about this, because it is still the wild, wild west out there as relates to cannabis.
Yep. Okay. Well, hey, Marc, thank you for joining me today on Uncaptive Agent, the future of insurance. I think what I've learned increasingly is, hey, there's a role for agents, but it's changing, and embracing technology makes it easier. And I'm super excited, and we'll talk more offline later, how your product can speed up the process of training, developing new talent in this business, which is going to be critical to every agent over the next decade. So again, thank you for being with me, and we'll talk soon.
Great. It was a real honor to spend the morning with you. Thanks, Tony.
You bet. I'm talking to independent agency owners about this all the time. If you'd like to have a more personalized conversation, click on the button or the link in the description, and we'll make that happen. You can also reach out to me at tonycaldwell.net/contact.